Welcome along, fellow time travelers. This is Scott Cardinal. This time around, we're going to travel back in time and check out Charlie Chaplin Studios in Hollywood, California. So sit back and pour yourself a cup of coffee, or a tankard of tea, or a mug of mead, or a chalice of cider, or a flagon filled with any beverage of your choice, and join me around the campfire. Sir Charles Spencer Chaplin Jr. was born on the 16th of April in 1889. His extraordinary career spanned more than 75 years, from childhood in the Victorian era in England until a year before his death in 1977 while he was living in Switzerland. As you know, Charlie Chaplin was a comic actor who rose to fame in the era of silent films. He wrote, directed, produced, edited, starred in, and composed the music for most of his films. And as a result of his screen persona as the Tramp, Charlie Chaplin became a worldwide icon, and he's considered one of the film industry's most important figures. I mean, think about it. All one has to do is say the name Charlie Chaplin pretty much anywhere in the world, and people instantly know who you're talking about. By the time he was just 26 years old, he was one of the highest paid people in the world, after having negotiated a contract worth $670,000 a year. That would be the equivalent of $18 million a year in 2022. In June of 1917, Charlie Chaplin signed a deal with the First National Pictures in return for $1 million. That would be the equivalent of nearly $24 million in 2022. So with some of that money and a whole slate of ideas for films in his roster, he chose to build his very own movie studio. So he acquired 5 acres of property located just south of the southeast corner of North La Brea Avenue and Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. The location was, at the time, a residential neighborhood. In his autobiography, Charlie Chaplin described his decision as follows. At the end of the mutual contract, I was anxious to get started with First National, but we had no studio. I decided to buy land in Hollywood and build one. The site was the corner of Sunset and La Brea and had a very fine 10-room house and 5 acres of lemon, orange, and peach trees. We built a perfect unit, complete with developing plant, cutting room, and offices. Charlie Chaplin purchased the site from a gentleman named R.S. McClellan, who lived on the site and had a large grove of fruit trees on the property. The lot had 300 feet of frontage on Sunset and 600 feet on La Brea. Chaplin announced that he would make his home on the northern part of the property and build his own motion picture plant on the south part of the property. In 1917, Charlie Chaplin's plans for half a dozen buildings along the exterior of the studio were described in the Los Angeles Times as being, and this is a quote, arranged as to give the effect of a picturesque English village street. Chaplin's application for a building permit was opposed by area residents, some of whom complained that it was way too close to the Hollywood High School. However, the city council voted 8-1 to approve Charlie Chaplin's permit. And so construction of the studio began in November of 1917. And the studio was opened for business on January 21st of 1918. And the studio was fully completed in 1919. The total investment was estimated to be around $100,000. That would be the equivalent of nearly $2 million in 2022. Even though Charlie Chaplin preserved a large residence on the northern end of the property and originally planned to live there, he never did. Instead, various studio personnel lived there over the years, including his brother, Sidney Chaplin. And the English cottages along La Brea served as the facade for offices, a screening room, and a film laboratory. And the grounds included stables, a swimming pool, and tennis courts. Oh, and the former orchard that was located in the central part of the property became the studio's backlot. And it is there where large outdoor sets were constructed for Chaplin's films. Now, on the southern end of the property, there were built 2 large open-air stages. And dressing rooms, a garage, a carpenter's shed, and a film vault were also built on the property. And of course, many of Charlie Chaplin's classic films were shot at the studios, including The Kid in 1921, The Gold Rush in 1925, City Lights in 1931, Modern Times in 1936, The Great Dictator in 1940, Monsieur Verdot in 1947, and Limelight in 1952. Also, over the course of time, many famous people would visit Charlie Chaplin at his studios, including Winston Churchill, Helen Keller, Lord Mountbatten. In fact, while there, as a wedding present, Charlie Chaplin produced a film for him and his wife to star in, and it was called Nice and Friendly. Also, Scottish singer and comedian Harry Lauder visited Chaplin in 1918, and they too made a short film together. During production of The Circus in 1927, a fire damaged Stage 2. And although no one was injured, the immense circus tent set was totally destroyed, and water damage from extinguishing the fire ruined nearly all of the costumes and props. Also, the expansion of La Brea Avenue in 1928 and 1929 forced the physical movement of the buildings adjacent to the street back 15 feet from their original locations. This, of course, disrupted the filming of City Lights, which started filming in December of 1928 and ended in September of 1930. And of course, there were a number of changes over the course of the following decades. For example, in the mid-1930s, 2 open-air stages were converted to closed sound stages. Also, a smaller stage was built over the site of the studio's swimming pool prior to Modern Times being filmed. For reasons unknown, since he certainly didn't need the money, in 1942, Charlie Chaplin sold the northern portion of the property that contained the house and the tennis courts and a portion of his backlot to Safeway stores. And so the house was demolished and a shopping center was built in its place. The following year, in October of 1943, Charlie Chaplin Studios were opened for the first time to be used to shoot an outside production. And that film was released in 1944 as Once Upon a Time, starring Cary Grant. Letting another film be shot in his studios was really unusual. In fact, the Los Angeles Times reported at the time that the Chaplin studio, and this is a quote, has been more or less sacrosanct in the sense that outsiders were practically never permitted to work there. And in 1949, Charlie Chaplin Studios was used as the site of Greta Garbo's last screen test. At the end of October 1952, Charlie Chaplin left the United States and he sold the studio the following year for $650,000. That is the equivalent of nearly $7.3 million in 2022. The new owner had planned to tear down the studio, but it was quickly leased to a television production company, and it became known as Kling Studios. In 1955, the studios were used to shoot the Adventures of Superman TV series starring George Reeves. And beginning in 1959, Red Skelton shot his television series at the facility. And in April of 1960, Red Skelton purchased the studio. But he didn't hold on to it for too long because Red Skelton sold the studio to CBS in 1962. And CBS shot the Perry Mason TV series there from 1962 until 1966. And it was in that year, 1966, when musician Herb Alpert and record executive Jerry Moss purchased the studio from CBS to serve as a headquarters for their company, A&M Records. In February of 1969, the studios were designated as a Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument. The studio was only the second entertainment-related building to receive the Historic Cultural Monument designation, after Grauman's Chinese Theater. Charlie Chaplin briefly revisited his former studio in April of 1972, when he made his only return trip to the United States in order to accept an honorary Academy Award. At the time, A&M had hoped to welcome him back with a ceremony, but instead he chose to avoid the attention, and he arranged to drive by the studio gates on a weekend. In 1985, the hit single and video, We Are the World, was recorded in A&M Studio A. And from 1981 until 1985, the TV show Soul Train was taped at the studios. In February of the year 2000, Jim Henson's children purchased the studio for $12.5 million, so it could serve as the new home of the Jim Henson Company. And the lot was used in November of 2010 as the set for the abandoned Muppet Studios in The Muppets movie. Jim Henson's daughter, Lisa, said, and this is a quote, "The buildings are a lovable hodgepodge of quirky, unusual spaces. There are unexpected elements in some of the offices, like original vaults and fish tank-like bathrooms. It's not your typical corporate space, but it's ideal for the Muppets. At a ceremony in June of 2000, the Henson Company unveiled a 12-foot color statue of Kermit the Frog, dressed as Charlie Chaplin's character, the Tramp, above the studio's main gate. Jim Henson's son, Brian, said at the time, and this is a quote, "When we heard that the Chaplin lot was for sale, we had to have it. It's the perfect home for the Muppets, and our particular brand of classy but eccentric entertainment. When people walk onto our lot, they fall in love with Hollywood again." I have actually been to this studio, and it actually is really incredible. You walk in there, and it is an amazing place, and it really feels like a time travel adventure. In every direction that you look, you kind of expect Charlie Chaplin to come walking around the corner. After all, it was his creation. And so this concludes this episode of Historic Hollywood. If you want to learn more about historic Hollywood and historic homes, gardens, and workspaces, please check out some of the other videos here on my channel. If you have any thoughts about the subject matter, please put those in the comments below and share what's on your mind. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, please give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. Oh, and you could also go on Amazon or any other bookseller and order some of my books. Also, can you kindly do yourself a favor and go to a local shelter and adopt a cat or a dog or any other furry friend? You'll be very glad that you did. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.